The homeless old man could have walked away with $6,800. No one would have stopped him. Instead, he quietly placed the wallet into the Marine's hands. "No one saw me find it," the old man said softly. "But God did, and that was enough." Master Gunnery Sergeant Owen Mercer opened the wallet. Every single dollar was still there. Atlas, his loyal German Shepherd canine, walked over, gently sniffed the old man's weathered hands, and silently sat beside him. Owen looked at him for a long moment. "Do you realize what you just gave back?" The old man smiled. "I know what I refused to lose." Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the very end, because one honest decision on a freezing winter morning was about to change 2 lives forever. Late November settled quietly over Silver Pine, Montana. A bitter wind swept fresh snow across Highway 191, covering the roadside pines and empty parking lots in a silence that seemed to slow the entire town. Master Gunnery Sergeant Owen Mercer, 45, guided his weathered pickup into a small service station after 3 long days of training volunteer search and rescue teams in the mountains. Standing just over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders, a square jaw, neatly trimmed dark beard touched with gray, and calm steel-blue eyes, Owen carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from more than 20 years in the United States Marine Corps. He was not a man who filled silence with unnecessary words. Fellow Marines often described him as dependable before they described him as brave, because he believed consistency earned trust more than speeches ever could. Losing his wife, Emily, to a sudden illness 5 years earlier had left a permanent ache that never truly disappeared. But instead of allowing grief to harden him, Owen devoted his free time to building a volunteer canine support program for rural rescue teams across Montana. Earlier that morning, he had withdrawn $6,800 from the bank to pay a local manufacturer producing custom ballistic vests, rescue harnesses, GPS tracking collars, and emergency trauma kits for working dogs that regularly entered dangerous terrain before human rescuers. Waiting patiently beside the truck was Atlas, Owen's 6-year-old German Shepherd canine partner. With his powerful black and rich tan coat, alert ears, intelligent amber eyes, and calm posture, Atlas looked every bit the disciplined working dog he had been trained to become. Yet beneath that imposing appearance lived an unusually gentle temperament around children and elderly people, a quality Owen trusted almost as much as the dog's remarkable instincts. Only a short distance away, another life moved at an entirely different pace. Harold Whitmore, 73, shuffled slowly across the edge of the parking lot, carrying a faded canvas bag filled with aluminum cans. Once a respected mechanic whose agricultural repair shop had served farmers throughout Gallatin Valley for decades, Harold had built his reputation on honesty and craftsmanship. Then his wife, Margaret, was diagnosed with cancer. One by one, he sold his business, his home, his equipment, and nearly everything he owned, trying to keep her alive. None of it was enough. Before she slipped away, Margaret held his rough, grease-stained hands and whispered words that had stayed with him through nearly 4 years of homelessness. "Whatever happens, don't let hardship decide what kind of man you become." Since then, Harold had survived one winter after another with little more than worn clothes, a threadbare blanket, and a small pouch containing the only mechanic's tools he had managed to keep. Hunger had tested him countless times. Pride had nearly broken him more than once. But despite sleeping under bridges, behind abandoned buildings, and inside church shelters whenever space allowed, he had never taken what belonged to someone else. As Owen climbed back into his pickup after paying for fuel, the black leather wallet slipped unnoticed from the back pocket of his camouflage trousers and landed softly in the snow. Harold was the only person who saw it fall. Harold remained where he was, the cold forgotten for a moment as he stared at the wallet resting in the snow. The pickup had already begun rolling toward the highway, its brake lights glowing faintly through the falling flakes. No one shouted, no one turned around. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the few people inside the convenience store were busy with their own lives. Slowly, Harold bent down and picked up the wallet. The leather still carried a trace of warmth from its owner's pocket. He opened it. The first thing he saw was a thick stack of cash. Harold counted it carefully, then counted it again to make sure his tired eyes had not deceived him. $6,800. His heartbeat quickened. That amount could rent a small apartment until spring. It could replace the boots that leaked every time snow melted beneath his feet. It could buy medicine for the aching joints that kept him awake most nights. More than anything, it could spare him another Montana winter spent wondering where he would sleep. For one long, dangerous minute, he simply stood there. "Nobody saw me," he whispered to himself. Then another voice answered inside his memory. Margaret. He could still picture her fragile smile in the hospital room, her pale hand wrapped around his calloused fingers. "Promise me one thing, Harold. Don't let hardship decide what kind of man you become." He had made that promise with tears in his eyes, believing he still had years left to keep it beside her. Instead, he had spent nearly 4 winters keeping it alone. Harold closed the wallet and started walking toward the convenience store before he could argue with himself any longer. Inside, Owen was patting each pocket of his camouflage trousers. His expression remained composed, but years of discipline could not hide the brief flash of concern crossing his face. "I think this belongs to you," Harold said, extending the wallet. Owen accepted it, opened it automatically, and checked every compartment. The cash remained untouched. Every card, every receipt, even the old photograph was exactly where it belonged. "You didn't take $1, Owen said quietly. Harold shook his head. "I didn't return it because you're a Marine," he replied. "I returned it because it isn't mine." Atlas stepped forward without being called. The German shepherd sniffed Harold's weathered hands, then gently leaned against the old man's leg before sitting beside him, his tail giving one slow sweep across the floor. Owen smiled faintly. Atlas had spent years reading people in life and death situations. He had learned to trust the dog's judgment. "Have you eaten today?" Owen asked. Harold hesitated just long enough to answer the question honestly. "Not since yesterday." "Then join me." They shared a simple dinner at the small diner across the road. Harold accepted hot food, but politely refused every attempt Owen made to leave money in his coat pocket afterward. Before they stepped back into the snowy evening, Owen handed him a plain white business card. "If you ever truly need a Marine," he said, "call me." Harold carefully tucked the card into the safest pocket inside his jacket, nodded once to Atlas, and it disappeared into the falling snow. Neither of them noticed the thin man standing beside a dark pickup across the street, silently watching every moment from beginning to end. 2 weeks passed, and the memory of the wallet quietly disappeared from everyone's mind except Harold's. Winter settled deeper over Silver Pine, turning every morning into another test of endurance. Harold never called the number Owen had given him. The small white business card remained tucked inside the inner pocket of his jacket, protected inside an old plastic sandwich bag to keep the snow from ruining the ink. More than once he reached for it, only to pull his hand away. For 73 years he had lived by one stubborn belief. If a man could still stand on his own feet, he should never ask another person to carry his weight. His days followed a simple rhythm. Before sunrise, he collected discarded cans and bottles along Highway 191. By afternoon, he wandered through the older neighborhoods where children often left broken bicycles leaning against fences or lying beside garages. Harold rarely asked for money. He simply repaired loose chains, bent wheels, frozen brake cables, or slipping gears with the worn mechanic's tools he still carried in a faded canvas pouch. Most families could not afford to pay much, but they always found something to give in return: a bowl of hot soup, a sandwich wrapped in foil, a can of stew, or a loaf of homemade bread. Harold accepted every gift with quiet gratitude, never taking more than he needed. Not everyone in Silverpine viewed kindness the same way. Vincent Crow, 48, watched people the way gamblers watched cards. Lean and sharp-faced with hollow cheeks, thinning dark hair, and restless gray eyes that never stopped measuring opportunity, Vincent possessed the unsettling habit of smiling without warmth. Years of drifting between shelters, short prison sentences for fraud, and countless small scams had convinced him that generosity was simply another weakness waiting to be exploited. He survived by controlling information more than people, spreading rumors until they became accepted as truth. Around the church's winter shelter, where donated food, blankets, and 6 heated beds were far more valuable than money during a Montana winter, Vincent had quietly built influence over those too frightened to challenge him. 3 days earlier, Vincent had overheard 2 volunteers discussing an old homeless mechanic who had returned a Marine's wallet filled with thousands of dollars. He had listened carefully. Then he started asking questions. By the end of the week, he knew Harold's name, where he usually slept, and, more importantly, that a United States Marine had personally shared dinner with him. To Vincent, that story did not sound admirable. It sounded useful. If people believe the Marine is looking for him, Vincent muttered to himself one freezing evening, they'll stop asking questions. The lie spread faster than he expected. He told one man that Harold had secretly kept part of the money before returning the wallet. He told another that the Marine had discovered the missing cash and was searching for the old mechanic. By the time the story reached the church shelter, the details had changed completely. Now people whispered that military investigators might come asking questions, and no one wanted trouble connected to the shelter. Harold noticed the difference almost immediately. Conversation stopped when he entered the room. People who usually shared coffee with him suddenly found reasons to leave. For the first time in 4 years, he felt something colder than the Montana winter. He felt suspicion, and he had no idea where it had come from. The answer came that same evening. Rachel Donovan, a 54-year-old church administrator with short silver hair, kind hazel eyes, and a face that carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who spent every winter trying to help more people than the shelter had room for, asked Harold to step into the small office beside the fellowship hall. She had coordinated the church's winter shelter for nearly a decade, and although compassion came naturally to her, responsibility often forced her into impossible decisions. Every volunteer trusted Rachel because she never raised her voice, but everyone also knew she would choose the safety of the entire shelter over any single individual if she believed there was a risk. She folded her hands together before speaking. "Harold, someone came to us with information today." Harold remained silent. "They claimed a Marine is looking for you because money disappeared from a wallet you returned. They said if we continue letting you stay here, the shelter could become part of an investigation." Harold stared at the floor for several long seconds. "I returned every dollar." "I believe you," Rachel answered immediately, "but I can't prove it, and the volunteers are frightened. If the donations stop or families decide this place isn't safe," her voice faltered before she forced herself to continue, "I'm asking you to leave tonight. I'm so sorry." Harold nodded once. He had spent enough years losing things to recognize the sound of another door closing. He thanked Rachel for everything the shelter had done for him, picked up his threadbare blanket, and walked quietly into the snow without asking anyone to defend him. An hour later, after the wind had grown stronger, Harold returned to the alley behind the church to collect the small shopping cart where he kept everything he still owned. The cart was gone. He searched behind dumpsters, beneath loading ramps, and along the icy sidewalk. Nothing. Inside that rusted cart had been his spare clothes, the worn leather folder containing the identification documents he had spent years replacing, the faded wedding photograph of Margaret smiling beneath an autumn maple tree, and the battered mechanic's tool pouch that represented the final pieces of the life he had once built with his own hands. Harold stood motionless as snow settled across the empty pavement. The first time he had lost everything, illness had taken it. This time, someone had chosen to. He found shelter beneath the narrow awning of a closed hardware store as the blizzard intensified. His hands trembled from cold and exhaustion while he reached inside his jacket. The plastic sleeve was still there. Inside it rested Owen Mercer's business card, perfectly dry. Harold turned it over between his weathered fingers for what felt like an hour. Pride had carried him through almost 4 years without asking anyone for help. It had kept him moving, but it had never made the nights warmer or the winters shorter. Margaret had never asked him to face every burden alone. She had only asked him not to lose the man he had always been. Slowly, Harold borrowed a payphone outside a nearby grocery store that had not yet closed for the night. He dialed the number. It rang only once. "Owen Mercer." Harold swallowed hard. "This is Harold, the old mechanic." There was no surprise in Owen's voice. "I remember." Silence lingered for only a heartbeat. Then Owen asked one simple question. "Where are you, Harold?" Harold quietly gave him the address. "Stay where you are," Owen said calmly. "Atlas and I are coming." The line went dead. Harold looked out at the blizzard swallowing the empty street, unsure whether hope had just arrived or whether he had waited too long to ask for it. The blizzard had not weakened by the time Owen Mercer guided his pickup beneath the awning where Harold waited. Snow swept sideways across the empty street, rattling loose signs and piling against abandoned storefronts. Atlas leaped from the passenger side before Owen had fully stopped, trotting straight toward Harold with quiet confidence. The German shepherd gently pressed his shoulder against the old mechanic's leg, as though greeting an old friend instead of someone he had met only once. Harold smiled for the first time in days, scratching behind Atlas's ears before Owen opened the truck door. "You look colder than you sounded over the phone," Owen said. Harold managed a tired smile. "I've looked worse." Without another word, Owen handed him a thick, insulated jacket that had been folded behind the truck seat. Harold started to refuse, but Owen shook his head. "It's a loan," he said calmly. "Marines expect borrowed gear to come back." The corner of Harold's mouth lifted slightly. "Then I'd better take good care of it." They drove through the storm toward a small roadside diner that stayed open all winter for truck drivers and sheriff's deputies. Warm light spilled across the snow-covered parking lot, and the smell of fresh coffee greeted them the moment they stepped inside. Over steaming bowls of beef stew, Harold quietly explained everything that had happened. The rumors, Rachel's impossible decision, the missing cart, the stolen documents, and the wedding photograph that mattered far more than anything else he had lost. Owen listened without interrupting. Years in the Marine Corps had taught him that people often revealed the most important details only after they believed they would not be judged. When Harold finished, Owen remained silent for several moments, his fingers resting loosely around a coffee mug. "I don't think Vincent wanted your belongings," he finally said. Harold looked up. "I think he wanted your reputation." The old mechanic frowned. "What good does that do him?" "It removes the one person who couldn't be controlled." Harold considered the answer and slowly nodded. It made an uncomfortable kind of sense. As they left the diner, Harold asked the question that had quietly followed him all evening. "Are you going after him?" Owen buttoned his coat against the wind before answering. "No." Harold looked surprised. "If I confront Vincent now," Owen continued, "people will remember 2 men arguing, not the truth. Rumors die the same way they begin, one fact at a time. The next morning, Owen began exactly where every investigation should begin. Not with accusations, with evidence. He returned to the service station where his wallet had fallen and introduced himself to the owner, requesting permission to review the exterior security footage from 2 weeks earlier. The timestamp showed his pickup leaving the fuel pump exactly as he remembered. Seconds later, the recording captured Harold bending slowly through the snow, retrieving the wallet, looking around the empty lot, and walking directly toward the convenience store entrance without leaving the camera's view. Owen watched the footage twice. Then he smiled quietly. Truth, he thought, had a remarkable habit of leaving footprints for anyone patient enough to follow them. Over the next 2 days, Owen followed the truth with the same discipline he had once used to plan reconnaissance missions. He never hurried, never assumed, and never accepted a single piece of evidence without finding something else to confirm it. The security footage was only the beginning. He obtained a copy of the bank receipt showing the exact time he had withdrawn $6,800 that morning. The timestamp matched the fuel purchase recorded at the service station. He spoke with Linda Harper, a woman in her early 60s with neatly tied gray hair and gentle blue eyes who had worked as the convenience store cashier for nearly 15 years. Linda immediately remembered the old mechanic who had quietly handed over a wallet without asking for a reward. He looked more worried about finding the owner than keeping warm, she told Owen. People don't fake that kind of concern. Owen continued to a nearby trucking depot and found Nathan Briggs, a broad-shouldered, 50-year-old long-haul truck driver with a thick salt and pepper beard and weathered skin earned from decades behind the wheel. Nathan had been fueling his own rig that morning. He clearly remembered seeing Harold walk directly into the store with the wallet instead of leaving the parking lot. Later that afternoon, Owen located a delivery driver who had entered the convenience store only moments after Harold. His recollection matched every detail already collected. Piece by piece, every independent account pointed toward exactly the same truth. Meanwhile, Vincent Crowe realized the story was slipping away from him. Desperate to hold on to the influence he had built through fear, he persuaded 2 homeless men to repeat his accusation publicly. Both had accepted free meals and small amounts of cash from Vincent before, and both feared losing the small favors that helped them survive the winter. Vincent believed that if enough people repeated the lie, facts would no longer matter. He underestimated Owen. Rather than confronting the men in front of the shelter, Owen invited them into the church meeting room, where Rachel Donovan quietly agreed to witness the conversation. He placed printed photographs from the security camera on the table. Beside them came the fuel receipt, the bank withdrawal record, written statements from Linda and Nathan, and the delivery driver's signed account. Owen never raised his voice. "I don't need either of you to defend me," he said calmly. "I don't even need you to defend Harold. I only need you to decide whether you're willing to stand against the truth that's sitting right here." The room fell silent. One man lowered his eyes first. "I never saw Harold steal anything," he admitted quietly. The second sighed heavily before rubbing both hands across his face. "Neither did I. Vincent told us what to say." By sunset, the rumors had collapsed under the weight of undeniable evidence. Rachel publicly apologized to Harold before the shelter volunteers, while Vincent found that the same people he had manipulated no longer believed a single word he spoke. Without threats, shouting, or violence, he lost the only thing he had truly valued: his influence. Before the following morning, Vincent quietly packed his belongings and disappeared from Silver Pine. That afternoon, as Owen and Harold shared coffee outside the garage of an old friend, their conversation drifted toward engines instead of injustice. When Harold casually described rebuilding tractor transmissions as a young mechanic, Owen smiled. "I think it's time someone met you." The garage door opened, and Raymond Ellis, a 67-year-old former Marine with a powerful frame softened only slightly by age, stepped into the winter sunlight. His cropped white hair, neatly trimmed mustache, oil-stained work clothes, and steady gray eyes reflected a lifetime spent repairing heavy machinery rather than talking about it. Without asking a single question, Raymond rolled the weathered engine of a 1968 farm tractor across the concrete floor until it stopped directly in front of Harold. "If you can make that engine run again," Raymond said evenly, "then we'll keep talking." The old tractor engine sat silent for only a few moments before Harold Whitmore rested both weathered hands against its cold steel housing. Raymond Ellis folded his arms without offering instructions, while Owen Mercer stood quietly near the garage door with Atlas lying at his boots. Nobody spoke. Harold slowly closed his eyes, turning the flywheel by hand until the worn machinery answered with a series of faint metallic clicks. His fingertips drifted across the valve cover, the fuel lines, and the aging injection pump with the familiarity of a man greeting an old friend after decades apart. Finally, he smiled. "The timing isn't the real problem," Harold said softly. "Someone adjusted it because they were trying to hide another noise." Raymond raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Harold continued working methodically. He loosened 2 bolts, removed a cracked governor linkage hidden beneath years of grease, cleaned a clogged fuel passage, then adjusted the valve clearance using nothing more than simple hand tools. 20 minutes later, he nodded once. "Try it." Raymond climbed into the tractor without comment. The starter groaned once, then twice. The engine roared to life with a deep, steady rhythm that echoed through the workshop. For several seconds, nobody moved. Raymond stepped back onto the concrete, listening carefully before shutting the engine down again. "I've spent 3 days chasing that fault," he admitted. "You found it by listening." Harold shrugged gently. "Machines talk. Most people just stop listening after they buy better equipment." A slow smile crossed Raymond's face. "It has been a long time since I've heard someone say that." The following Monday, Harold arrived before sunrise, wearing the same clean flannel shirt he had carefully washed by hand the night before. Raymond handed him a pair of heavy work gloves, pointed toward an aging grain baler waiting in the corner, and simply said, "Clock starts now." There was no ceremony, no speech, no special treatment because Harold had once been homeless. He received the same hourly wage as every mechanic who worked in the restoration shop. If he made mistakes, he would correct them. If he produced excellent work, he would earn respect exactly the way everyone else had. That was precisely how Harold wanted it. As the days passed, forgotten machines slowly returned to life beneath his hands. Rusted combines, weathered irrigation pumps, antique tractors, and worn hay balers that customers believed were beyond saving began leaving the shop running better than they had in years. Harold never hurried. He believed every engine deserved patience because every shortcut eventually collected its debt. Atlas soon developed his own routine. Whenever Owen stopped by after training sessions with local volunteer search teams, the German Shepherd wandered directly toward Harold's workbench before greeting anyone else. The dog stretched out beside the old mechanic's toolbox, occasionally lifting his head whenever a wrench struck metal or an engine finally settled into a smooth idle. Customers often laughed that Atlas looked less like a working canine than the shop's unofficial quality inspector. Within only a few weeks, the atmosphere inside Raymond's garage had quietly changed. Nobody called him the homeless man anymore. Nobody whispered about where he had slept the previous winter. Mechanics, customers, and delivery drivers alike simply smiled when they walked through the door and asked the same question. "Is old Harold working today?" Each time Raymond heard the nickname, he noticed something important. No one spoke it with pity. Every single person said it with respect. By early spring, Harold had settled into a routine that felt almost unfamiliar because it carried something he had lived without for years: stability. He unlocked the workshop every morning before sunrise, brewed the first pot of coffee before Raymond arrived, and spent a few quiet minutes walking through the rows of waiting machines. He had developed the habit decades earlier when he owned his own repair shop. A mechanic, he believed, should greet every machine before asking it to work again. Raymond noticed the ritual but never commented on it. Some habits did not need explaining. One Friday afternoon, Owen drove into the yard with Atlas sitting proudly in the passenger seat. "I've got somewhere I'd like you to come tomorrow," Owen said. Harold wiped the grease from his hands. "What kind of place?" "A gathering." "What kind of gathering?" Owen smiled. "The kind where people should hear your story." Harold almost refused. He had spent years learning how to disappear. Standing in front of hundreds of strangers felt far more frightening than sleeping beneath a bridge during a snowstorm. But Owen never pressured him. He simply handed Harold a neatly folded collared shirt. "Just come as yourself." The following afternoon, they entered a large community hall outside Bozeman, where Marines, retired Marines, canine handlers, military instructors, search and rescue volunteers, and their families gathered each spring. Conversations echoed warmly across the room while children laughed between tables decorated with old photographs, unit flags, and working dog equipment. Harold had never seen so many people connected by service, yet completely free of rank or ceremony. When everyone had taken their seats, Owen stepped onto the small stage. He did not begin by talking about courage. He did not begin by talking about homelessness. Instead, he spoke about integrity. "Late last November," he said, "a man who didn't own a bed to sleep in found my wallet. Inside was $6,800, intended to buy life-saving equipment for working dogs. No one saw him pick it up. No one would have known if he had walked away." The room became perfectly still. He returned every dollar. Owen looked toward Harold. He wasn't rich. He wasn't comfortable. He wasn't looking for recognition. He simply refused to let hardship decide who he would become. For a heartbeat, silence filled the hall. Then every person slowly rose to their feet. The applause spread naturally across the room, not loud enough to overwhelm, but steady enough to communicate something words could not. Harold lowered his eyes, overwhelmed not because people knew he had once been homeless, but because they understood the choice he had made when nobody had been watching. Someone near the front called out gently, "Would you like to say something?" Harold looked toward Owen, who answered with a small, encouraging nod. The old mechanic stepped forward. His voice remained quiet. "I only did what my wife would have wanted me to do. Nothing more." He stepped back. The second standing ovation lasted even longer than the first. Over the following weeks, several retired Marines volunteered their time to help Harold replace every identification document he had lost. Others quietly connected him with legal aid, veterans charities willing to assist with administrative costs, and local organizations that helped him rebuild records destroyed when his belongings disappeared. Nobody offered him pity. They offered him opportunities to keep building the life he had already started rebuilding himself. One evening, Raymond finished locking the workshop and pointed toward the narrow staircase at the back of the building. "There is someone waiting upstairs." Harold climbed slowly. Owen stood outside a modest room above the garage, holding a single brass key. "It isn't a gift," Owen said, placing the key into Harold's hand. "The rent comes out of your paycheck like everyone else who earns a place here." Harold looked around the small room. A bed stood beside the window. A wooden table overlooked the workshop yard below. It was simple. It was enough. Owen smiled. "A year ago," he said quietly, "you told me my wallet didn't belong to you." He waited until Harold met his eyes. "Today, this room belongs to you. Because you earned it." Harold closed his fingers around the key. For the first time since Margaret's passing, he finally felt like he had come home. The first cool mornings of September settled over Silverpine with crisp mountain air, golden cottonwoods, and sunlight that carried more warmth than the winter that had changed two lives less than a year before. Almost a year had passed since Harold Whitmore first walked through the doors of Raymond Ellis's workshop as a man with nothing except a worn toolbox and an unbroken conscience. Now, the same workshop greeted him every morning with the familiar scent of machine oil, polished steel, and fresh-cut timber. His hands, once numb from sleeping outdoors through Montana winters, had regained their steady confidence. Every scar across his weathered fingers seemed to carry a memory, and every repaired engine reminded him that broken things could work again when someone cared enough to understand them. No one at Ellis Restoration Works referred to Harold as the homeless man anymore. Around the shop, he had become simply Old Harold, a nickname spoken with genuine affection instead of pity. Younger mechanics sought his advice before opening repair manuals, because they had learned that Harold often diagnosed problems by listening before touching a wrench. Raymond laughed that Harold possessed ears older than every computer ever built, and Harold always answered with the same quiet smile that Margaret used to say appeared only when he forgot to be sad. Atlas had developed a routine of his own. Whenever Owen Mercer stopped by after finishing training sessions with local search and rescue volunteers, the 6-year-old German Shepherd would trot directly across the workshop floor and settle beside Harold's workbench. Sometimes Harold scratched behind Atlas's ears while tightening bolts. Sometimes neither of them moved for several minutes. The mechanics joked that Atlas served as the unofficial quality inspector because he never seemed willing to leave until another machine roared back to life. The workshop had slowly become more than a place to repair equipment. With Owen's encouragement and several retired Marines volunteering their weekends, it had begun welcoming young people who needed a second chance as much as they needed a job skill. Harold never considered himself a teacher, yet he found unexpected joy in explaining how patience often solved problems that force never could. "Listen first," he often told them while placing a hand on an engine block. "Machines speak. People do too. Most trouble starts because nobody takes the time to hear either one." One clear Saturday morning, as sunlight streamed through the open garage doors, Raymond informed Harold that someone had arrived asking whether the workshop was hiring. Harold wiped grease from his hands and looked toward the entrance. Standing hesitantly outside was a thin 19-year-old carrying a faded backpack with one broken shoulder strap. His sneakers were worn almost completely smooth, and the oversized denim jacket hanging from his narrow frame looked as though it had belonged to someone much larger. Sandy brown hair fell untidily across worried blue eyes that constantly searched for reasons to expect rejection before anyone had spoken. Years of moving from one temporary shelter to another had taught him not to hope too quickly. The young man stepped inside slowly, gripping the straps of his backpack with nervous hands. Before Harold could introduce himself or ask for the visitor's name, the teenager quietly reached into his jacket pocket and placed a weathered leather wallet on the workbench between them. "I found this in the parking lot," he said softly. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." Harold lowered his eyes to the wallet without touching it, and for just a moment, memories of another cold morning, another parking lot, and another impossible choice returned, as clearly as if the snow had never melted. Harold rested one weathered hand beside the wallet, but never opened it. Instead, he pulled out an old wooden chair. "Sit down," he said gently. The young man obeyed after a brief hesitation. "My name is Caleb. I'm Harold." For several quiet moments, the workshop echoed only with the ticking of cooling engines. Atlas wandered over from the opposite side of the garage and calmly lay beside Caleb's boots, resting his head across his front paws. The young man looked surprised. "I thought police dogs didn't trust strangers." Harold smiled. Atlas trusts character long before people do. Caleb lowered his eyes. I've been sleeping in abandoned buildings for almost 2 months. I lost my construction job after my company closed. My truck was repossessed last week. His fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. When I found that wallet, I kept telling myself maybe life finally owed me one good break. Harold nodded slowly. Every word sounded painfully familiar. A year ago, he began quietly, I stood in another parking lot, holding a wallet with $6,800 inside. I hadn't owned a real bed in years. Nobody saw me pick it up. Caleb listened without moving. I could have walked away. Harold paused before looking toward the photograph of Margaret that now stood on a small shelf above his workbench. My wife once told me something before she passed away. She said, "Never let hardship decide who you are." His voice remained steady. I returned that wallet because I wanted to keep that promise. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Harold slowly pushed the wallet back across the workbench. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Caleb frowned. Aren't you? No. Why? Because if I make the decision for you, it won't belong to you. The young man stared at the worn leather for a long time. Harold continued softly. When this day becomes a memory years from now, you won't remember how much money was inside. He met Caleb's uncertain eyes. You'll remember the kind of man you decided to become. Those words seemed to remove a weight Caleb had been carrying since he entered the garage. Without another question, he picked up the wallet and stood. I already knew the answer before I came here. Harold smiled. I think you did. Caleb walked quickly toward the parking lot. Outside, Owen Mercer had just arrived after finishing a morning K-9 training exercise. He watched from beside his pickup truck as Caleb approached an elderly rancher who was searching anxiously around an old blue pickup. Moments later, the rancher's shoulders relaxed with visible relief as Caleb handed over the wallet. Owen quietly walked over to Harold. You never told him to return it. Harold shook his head. I only told him the story. The choice had to stay his. Owen looked toward Caleb, who was leaving the parking lot with a lighter stride than when he had arrived. A quiet smile crossed the Marine's face. A year ago, Owen said, I thought I was protecting $6,800. Harold looked at Atlas, who remained calmly watching the young man disappear down the sidewalk. No, Harold replied. You were protecting something much harder to replace. Owen understood. It had never truly been about the money. It had been about preserving one honest heart so that one day it could help another find its own. Outside, the autumn wind carried golden leaves across the parking lot, where one more quiet decision had changed a life. And somewhere ahead, another door had just been left open. Harold's story reminds us that the greatest miracles do not always arrive with thunder or signs from heaven. Sometimes, God works through one quiet decision made when no one else is watching. Harold could have kept the wallet, but he chose integrity over desperation. Owen could have walked away after getting his money back, but he chose compassion. Through those two choices, God opened a new path where there had only been loss. In everyday life, we may never know how far one honest act, one kind word, or one helping hand can travel. You may be carrying pain today, but your circumstances do not define your worth. God still sees you, and your story is not finished. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what lesson stayed with you most. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you and your family, strengthen you in hard times, guide your choices, protect those you love, and fill your heart with peace and hope. Thank you for watching.